The first alarm doesn't sound like panic. It sounds like confusion. A medication cart tips over. A security radio crackles and goes dead. Somewhere inside the hospital, a door that should never be locked is. In the trauma bay, the new nurse stands still, too quiet, too calm. People brush past her without looking. She watches the corridor the way others watch a monitor, counting steps, listening for rhythm, not afraid, focused. Someone laughs under their breath. She won't last the night. They are already wrong. The hospital at night does not sleep. It breathes. Air handlers hum behind the walls. Monitors chirp in uneven rhythms. Wheels roll across polished floors with practiced indifference. Every sound means something to someone, even if no one is listening closely anymore. The new nurse arrives 10 minutes early. She signs her name on the clipboard without flourish, prints carefully, no wasted motion. Her badge still looks stiff, unfamiliar against the fabric of her scrubs. Someone glances at it, then looks away. No one introduces her. The charge nurse is already irritated, short staffing, too many admissions, a trauma expected from the highway. Phones ring. A printer jams, a junior resident argues quietly with a respiratory therapist. It's a normal night, already behind schedule. "Float nurse?" someone asks, not waiting for the answer. She nods once. Her voice is soft when she speaks, clear, unremarkable. She doesn't volunteer background, doesn't explain the transfer, just listens while assignments are handed out too fast to absorb. Trauma overflow. Hall beds, med-surg holding until morning. No one asks if she can handle it. They assume she can't. She moves through the department like someone learning a map, but her eyes don't wander. She notices exits before stations, counts doors without stopping. When she reaches the trauma bay, she pauses, not from hesitation but timing, waiting for a gurney to pass before stepping in. A senior nurse watches her for half a second longer than necessary. Too calm, she thinks. Too quiet. The new nurse checks equipment without prompting. Suction, oxygen, crash cart seal intact. She straightens a monitor cable that wasn't bothering anyone. Aligns the bed with the wall markings instead of the door. "Hey," a tech mutters, half amused. "You can relax. Nothing's happening yet." She gives a small nod and continues. A patient arrives early, minor injuries, high anxiety. The nurse speaks to him low and steady, not reassuring, not dismissive, just factual. Her hands are precise, efficient, almost economical. No wasted gestures. The patient's breathing slows. Across the bay, laughter breaks out near the nurse's station. Someone tells a story about a float who froze during a code last week. A quick joke. Not cruel, just tired. The new nurse doesn't look over. She documents cleanly. Her charting is sparse but complete. No defensive language, no guessing. When a monitor glitches, she doesn't call for help. She checks the connection, resets once, then replaces the lead without comment. The charge nurse notices this, but only registers it later, when she realizes no one complained. A security officer walks past the trauma doors, radio crackling softly at his shoulder. The nurse's eyes lift, not to his face, but to the radio. She listens until the static fades, then returns to her task. Another alarm sounds somewhere deeper in the hospital. Not urgent. Just wrong enough to stand out. No one reacts. "New girl," a resident says quietly. "You ever worked nights before?" "Yes," she answers. "Nothing else." He waits, then shrugs and moves on. The overhead lights flicker once. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to notice if you're watching. She glances at the ceiling, then at the wall clock, mentally adjusts her timeline. Down the corridor, a set of double doors closes harder than usual. The sound echoes longer than it should. She straightens just slightly. At the nurse's station, someone sighs loudly. If this shift gets any worse, it trails off. A phone rings unanswered for 3 seconds too long. The new nurse finishes her task and steps back, scanning the bay again. Not for patients, for flow, for gaps, for what doesn't belong. Her face shows nothing. If anyone had been looking closely, they might have noticed how she positions herself, not in the center of the room, not against the wall, but where she can see 2 corridors at once. If anyone had been paying attention, they might have noticed she hasn't checked her phone. Not once. But no one is watching her. Why would they? She's just the quiet new nurse. Hospitals fail quietly before they fail loudly. It starts with delays that feel accidental, a call light unanswered for a minute too long, a medication order that doesn't populate when it should, a transport request marked complete without anyone remembering the transport. The night absorbs these things, fatigue explains them away. The nurse notices anyway. She notices that the security officer who passed earlier doesn't come back on his next round. Notices that environmental services hasn't checked the west corridor, even though it's scheduled every hour. Notices that the trauma board still lists an incoming patient who should have arrived 20 minutes ago. She doesn't say anything yet. She checks a patient's 4, adjusts the flow rate by a fraction and listens, not to the patient, but to the space beyond the curtain. Voices travel strangely at night. Sound bends around corners. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse is on the phone, voice tight. Yes, I understand. No, I'm saying the door badge did scan. Then why does it show... She stops speaking when the line goes dead. The printer starts up again on its own. Spits out half a page, no one claims it. The nurse walks over, tears it cleanly, and reads just enough to know it's a location log. She puts it face down. It's been trash all week. Someone mutters. The nurse nods once as if agreeing, but her eyes are already on the corridor camera monitor. One feed stutters, just a hiccup, but when it stabilizes, the timestamp has jumped forward by 30 seconds. No announcement follows, no alert. She exhales through her nose, barely perceptible, and moves. In the trauma bay, she repositions a gurney that doesn't have a patient yet, angles it away from the door. She wheels a supply cart 6 inches to the left, clearing a line of movement that didn't exist before. A tech notices. You expecting a rush? Possibly, she says. That's all. Down the hall, patient raises his voice, confused post-op, trying to stand when he shouldn't. The nurse responds quickly, calm but firm, guiding him back to bed. She secures the rail and lowers her voice. Listen to me, she says, not loudly, not urgently. Stay here. He does. When she steps back into the corridor, the overhead speakers crackle. Attention all staff. Stand by for... The message cuts out. A few people laugh reflexively. Someone claps sarcastically. Professional operation, a resident says. The nurse doesn't smile. She walks to the nearest stairwell door and tests it, not pulling, just feeling the handle. Locked. It shouldn't be. She checks the sign. No lockdown posted. She doesn't try again. Instead, she memorizes it. At the station, the charge nurse rubs her temple. Security's not answering, she says to no one in particular. Probably a dead zone. Which zone? The nurse asks. The charge nurse looks up, surprised by the interruption. What? Which zone? The nurse repeats gently. The charge nurse hesitates, then glances at the map. West Wing. Why? The nurse nods. Thank you. She walks away before a follow-up question can form. In the West Wing, the lights are still on. Everything looks normal, too normal. The air feels different, still, like ventilation paused mid-cycle. She listens again, longer this time. A metal sound, soft, deliberate, not dropped, not accidental. She steps into a patient room and closes the curtain, not fully, just enough to break sightlines from the hall. Checks the monitor, confirms stability, then leans close to the patient. "If anyone comes in," she says quietly, "don't open your eyes. Don't speak." The patient frowns. "Why?" "Just do that for me." Something in her tone makes him nod. She steps back into the corridor and walks the opposite direction unhurried. She passes two nurses debating a charting issue and says nothing. Passes an empty security desk with a radio still charging untouched. She picks it up. No signal. She sets it down exactly where it was. At the nurse's station, another alarm sounds, this one sharper. A door forced open somewhere it shouldn't be. This time no one laughs. People look at each other. Questions start forming half-spoken. The nurse stops beside the charge nurse. "You may want to slow admissions," she says, "and move anyone stable away from the west wing." The charge nurse blinks. On whose authority? The nurse meets her eyes, calm, unapologetic. "On caution," she says. For a moment the charge nurse almost pushes back. Then another alarm sounds, closer. "Fine," the charge nurse says. "Just help where you can." The nurse nods once. That's all she needed. As she turns away, the overhead lights flicker again, longer this time, somewhere in the hospital. A door locks that should not have. And now the fractures are no longer subtle. The west wing goes quiet in a way that feels intentional, not silent. Hospitals are never silent, but controlled. The air handlers restart with a delayed shudder. The overhead paging system remains blank. No announcement explains why the access doors slide shut at both ends of the corridor. They just close. A red indicator appears above the door panel. Restricted. A nurse at the station frowns. "Is that a drill?" No one answers. The new nurse is already moving. She walks the corridor once, steady and unhurried, as if checking rooms. She doesn't rush patients, doesn't alarm them. She adjusts curtains, lowers voices, and gently suggests relocation where it won't be questioned. "Radiology's running behind," she tells one patient. "We'll move you closer to the station. Observation protocol," she tells another. "Temporary." She uses the hospital's own language against the situation. No one resists. At the far end of the wing, she stops short of the locked doors. She doesn't touch the panel this time. She watches the seam where the doors meet. There's a faint scuff along the lower edge. New, fresh. Foot traffic doesn't make marks like that. She steps back. Her hand brushes the wall, fingers grazing the emergency release casing. She doesn't open it. She checks the screws instead. One is missing. Behind her, voices rise. Confusion spreading now that movement is restricted. A junior nurse argues with the transporter. A resident demands to know why his patient can't be moved. The charge nurse's voice cuts through, tight. "Everyone just hold. Security's looking into it." Security is not looking into it. The nurse knows this because the radio she picked up earlier is still silent on the desk where she left it. Because the camera feed still skips. Because the lock came without warning. She returns to the nurse's station and lowers her voice. "West Wing needs to be treated as closed," she says. "No through traffic." The charge nurse exhales sharply. "I can't just shut down a wing. You already have," the nurse replies. Not confrontational, just factual. Another alarm sounds. This one is local, door integrity compromised. Someone swears. A security guard finally appears at the end of the corridor, breathing hard, hand near his belt. "Who locked this down?" he demands. The nurse watches him approach. She doesn't step forward. She lets him speak first. "Badge access just failed on 3 doors," he continues. "That shouldn't happen." "Where's your partner?" she asks. He blinks. He went to check the stairwell." "Which one?" The guard hesitates. "West stairwell." She nods. "He won't answer you." The guard stiffens. "What?" Before she can explain, a sound carries down the corridor. Not loud, not sudden. Metal against metal. Deliberate. The guard's hand tightens. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," the nurse says. She turns to the charge nurse. "Move your people back, now." "For what reason?" The charge nurse snaps, panic edging through. The nurse meets her gaze, holds it. "Because whoever locked that door did it from the inside." The corridor seems to shrink. The guard starts to speak, but the lights cut out in the west wing, only for a second. When they come back on, the red indicator above the door is gone. Unlocked. No one moves. The nurse does. She steps into the corridor and raises her hand. Not a command, just a signal. The guard mirrors her instinctively, stopping a step behind. She doesn't approach the door. She checks reflections instead. Polished surfaces, glass panels, nothing obvious, no shadows. "Radio for backup," she says to the guard. "I already did." "Try again," she says, "and don't say problem, say containment." He stares at her, then obeys. A patient monitor alarms suddenly. Tachycardia, a real emergency layered on top of the false one. The nurse pivots instantly, attending the patient with calm efficiency. Meds, oxygen, reassurance. She stabilizes him in under a minute. The guard watches unsettled. "You always this calm?" She doesn't answer. From the far end of the corridor, a door opens softly, too softly. The nurse straightens, eyes lifting, not in fear but calculation. She positions herself between the sound and the station, not blocking, shielding. The first real sign of intrusion is not a weapon, it's a set of hospital scrubs that don't belong. The guard whispers, "That's not." The nurse raises one finger. Silence. The figure pauses, realizing they've been noticed. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the figure runs, back toward the locked doors. The nurse exhales slowly. The first lock was not to keep them out, it was to see who noticed. The corridor doesn't erupt into chaos. It tightens. The guard sprints after the fleeing figure, shouting into his radio. Footsteps echo, then fade. The locked doors at the end of the wing remain closed this time, properly closed. The nurse doesn't chase. She watches the direction of flight, the timing, the way the figure moved. Fast, efficient, no wasted motion. Not panicked, practiced. She turns back toward the nurse's station. That's where the real damage begins. Voices overlap now. Questions come too quickly. A resident demands to know why a hallway was sealed without notice. A transporter insists he has a critical pickup order. The charge nurse tries to answer 3 people at once. The nurse steps in, not loudly, not physically imposing. She waits for a pause that never comes, then speaks anyway. "West Wing is compromised," she says. The word lands wrong. "Compromised how?" the administrator asks. He's arrived from upstairs, tie loosened, irritation already visible. "This is a hospital, not safe for transit," the nurse finishes. The administrator turns to the charge nurse. "Who is this?" "Float," the charge nurse says, a little defensively. The administrator looks back at the nurse. "On what basis are you making that call?" She answers honestly. "Observed intrusion, controlled access manipulation, security failure." He exhales sharply, dismissive. "So you think you saw something?" "I know what I saw," she says. The difference matters to her. It does not matter to him. "We can't lock down a wing because someone thinks they saw the wrong scrubs," he says. "We have patients to move, surgeons waiting." As if on cue, a gurney approaches the west corridor doors. "Stop," the nurse says. The transporter slows, confused, looking to the administrator. "Proceed," the administrator says, annoyed. The nurse doesn't raise her voice. She steps forward and places her hand on the gurney rail. Not forceful, just present. "Please don't," she says. The administrator's patience snaps. "Get your hand off that bed." The nurse looks at him, really looks, measures him the way she measured the corridor earlier. Then she removes her hand. The gurney rolls forward, the doors open. For half a second, nothing happens. Then the gurney jerks sideways, hard. A concealed cable snaps taut across the corridor, catching the wheels and slamming the bed into the wall. The patient cries out, staff shout. The transporter stumbles back, barely keeping his feet. The corridor erupts. "Code! Security!" The nurse is already moving. She cuts the cable cleanly with trauma shears from her pocket. One precise motion, no hesitation. She stabilizes the gurney, checks the patient and pulls them backward, out of the corridor. No one questions her now. The administrator's face drains of color. That, the nurse says calmly, was a passive denial device. Whoever placed it expected movement. The charge nurse swallows hard. You knew that was there? I suspected, the nurse replies, because the door reopened. The administrator stares at the severed cable on the floor. His voice lowers. Why didn't you stop us? I tried, she says. No accusation, just fact. Security floods the area now. Too late, too loud. Radios crackle with overlapping instructions. Someone calls for a full lockdown. The nurse steps back as control shifts away from her. The administrator rounds on the charge nurse. Why wasn't this escalated sooner? The nurse watches them argue. She does not interrupt. A resident approaches her, shaken. How did you cut that so fast? It was under tension, she says. You don't soar, you commit. He doesn't understand the words, only the confidence behind them. The guard returns, breathless. Lost him. He doubled back through the stairwell. Which stairwell? The nurse asks. The guard freezes. West. She nods once. Then he's not alone. The administrator overhears. What does that mean? It means this was a test, she says. And you failed it. The administrator bristles. You don't get to say that. She meets his eyes. Then don't ask me what it means. For a long moment, no one speaks. Finally, the charge nurse breaks it. What do we do now? The nurse considers the question, really considers it. Then she answers carefully. You stop moving people, she says. You secure what you have. And you assume whoever's inside knows your protocols better than you do. The administrator scoffs, but the sound lacks conviction now. Who are you to make that call? He asks. The nurse looks past him, down the corridor, at the doors, at the places where systems failed quietly. Someone who doesn't get to be wrong, she says. They still don't give her authority, but they start listening. And that changes everything. The lockdown is declared without clarity. Overhead speakers announce a temporary operational restriction, the phrasing vague enough to avoid panic and useless enough to confuse everyone at once. Departments call each other for confirmation. Confirmation doesn't come. The nurse doesn't wait for it. She moves through the hospital the way water moves, around obstacles, through gaps, never stopping long enough to be questioned. She doesn't issue orders. She reframes tasks. Can you hold that patient here for observation? Let's reroute this transfer through imaging instead. Better to stage supplies closer just in case. She uses just in case carefully. It sounds reasonable. It sounds non-threatening. People comply. She collects small advantages. A locked medication room becomes a secure staging area. A crash cart is repositioned not for access, but for cover. A supply closet is cleared and marked biohazard to discourage entry. No one notices the pattern forming. Security presence increases, but it's uneven. Guards bunch at entrances, leaving internal corridors thin. The nurse notes it and compensates, guiding staff movement away from blind zones. A respiratory therapist stops her. You're not on this unit. I am tonight, the nurse replies. It's enough. A trauma call comes in, real this time. Motor vehicle collision, multiple injuries. The instinct to move fast presses against the instinct to lock down. The nurse stands at the junction where those instincts collide. She watches the incoming path, then the internal routes, and quietly changes the plan. She directs the trauma team to a bay closer to the station, farther from the compromised wing. She doesn't argue. She simply prepares it first. When the patient arrives, momentum carries the decision. No one pushes back. The administrator watches this happen from a distance, uneasy. He can't articulate why it bothers him. She isn't breaking rules. She's exploiting the space between them. A nurse whispers to another, she always this decisive. Maybe she's done this before, the other says. They mean hospitals. They are wrong. The nurse pauses at a wall map and traces routes with her eyes. She mentally overlays security coverage, patient acuity, and choke points. She marks 2 stairwells as compromised and 1 as usable. Not because it's secure, but because it's predictable. She chooses predictability over perfection. A janitor pushes a cart toward a closed corridor. She intercepts gently. That area's restricted. I was told to clean. Later, she says. I'll sign off. She does, neatly, legibly. The janitor leaves without another word. A young nurse approaches, voice low. They're saying someone might be inside. The nurse nods. There is. The young nurse swallows. Should we hide? No, the nurse says. We should work. The simplicity steadies her. A commotion erupts near the west stairwell. Raised voices, a scuffle cut short. Security reports a false alarm. Nothing found. The nurse hears the report and frowns, not because of what it says, but because of what it avoids. She adjusts again. She moves a group of stable patients into rooms that share walls, reducing exposed corridors. She dims lights selectively, not for mood, but to sharpen contrast. She ensures doors close softly, not slamming. She is shaping the environment. The administrator finally confronts her near the station. You're making operational changes without clearance. She looks at him. I'm making clinical ones. That's not the same thing. It is when movement is the risk, she replies. He opens his mouth to argue, then stops. Another alarm sounds, this one suppressed quickly, manually overridden. Who did that? He demands. The nurse doesn't answer. She walks to the panel and checks the override code. It's not a standard hospital sequence. Someone improvised. Your intruder is watching responses, she says quietly. Every alarm tells him where you're thin. The administrator's voice drops. How do you know that? Because that's what I would do, she says. The words hang there, heavier than she intended. A nearby guard looks at her differently now. The nurse realizes she's said too much. She corrects course, not by retracting, but by acting. She coordinates with the charge nurse to stagger staff movement, reduce clustering, and keep radios on silent vibrate instead of open channels. She uses hand signals without naming them. People follow, not because they understand, because it works. Time stretches. The hospital holds, tense but intact. No more traps are triggered, no new intrusions spotted. The nurse finally allows herself to stop moving. She stands at the edge of the station, watching reflections in the glass, listening to the building breathe again. She hasn't solved the problem. She's contained it, and containment, she knows, is only temporary. Whatever is inside the hospital is waiting. And now so is she. The hospital does not erupt. It strains. Pressure builds in the narrow spaces between decisions. Staff move more carefully now. Voices lowered, eyes searching faces for cues. The overhead lights remain steady, fluorescent and unforgiving, revealing everything except intent. The first injury is not from the intruder. A nurse slips while moving a patient bed through a rerouted corridor. Her wrist bends wrong. She cries out more in frustration than pain. The new nurse is there immediately. Brace applied, instructions given, relief called in. She absorbs the disruption without letting it spread. But escalation does not announce itself. It accumulates. A fire door on the second floor locks unexpectedly, trapping two orderlies between zones. A medication dispensing unit reboots without warning, delaying critical doses. A camera feed goes dark and stays dark. Each failure alone is manageable. Together, they form a pattern. The nurse tracks it silently. She notes timing, placement, sequence. Someone is probing the hospital's response, testing how far pressure can be applied before something breaks. A call comes in from ICU, unverified movement near a supply stairwell. Security responds aggressively this time. 3 guards converging. They find nothing. Again. The nurse doesn't relax. False negatives are worse than false positives. She approaches the charge nurse and speaks low. Your security response is predictable now. The charge nurse exhales. We don't have alternatives. You do, the nurse says. You're just not using them. She gestures subtly to transport staff, environmental services, even dietary, people who know the hospital's rhythms better than any guard. They see more than your cameras, she says. Ask them. It's an unconventional suggestion. It works. Within minutes, reports begin filtering in. Not alarms, not footage, but observations. A door that opened twice. Footsteps where there shouldn't be any. A person who avoided eye contact too deliberately. The picture sharpens. The intruder is not wandering. He is moving with purpose. A trauma pager goes off. Multiple inbound casualties from a bar fight across town. The timing is wrong. Too much at once. The hospital's capacity tightens. The administrator looks overwhelmed now, the weight of consequence finally visible. We can't divert, he says. Not tonight. The nurse watches the trauma board update. Beds fill, hallways narrow, movement increases. Exactly what the intruder wants. She makes a decision. She pulls the charge nurse aside. You need to shut down trauma intake for 10 minutes. The charge nurse stares at her. That's not my call. It is if you phrase it correctly, the nurse says. Say equipment failure. Say staffing recalibration. Say anything. That could cost lives. So could crowding a compromised floor, the nurse replies. Choose which risk you can see. The charge nurse hesitates, then nods. She makes the call. 10 minutes buys them space. Not enough. The first direct confrontation doesn't look like one. A man in hospital scrubs wheels a linen cart toward a restricted corridor. He moves like he belongs there, head down, pace unremarkable. The nurse spots him instantly, not because of his face, because of his shoes. Wrong soles for hospital issue. Too quiet, too controlled. She doesn't stop him. She adjusts the environment instead. She signals a guard to step away from the corridor, opening a path. The man takes it, predictable as gravity. As he passes a blind corner, the nurse steps out, not blocking him, but present. Can I help you? She asks. He freezes, not in fear, but calculation. No, he says, accent neutral, voice flat. She nods, then turn around. His hand moves toward the cart. She doesn't raise her voice. Don't, she says. The word carries weight because of how little force it uses. He hesitates, just long enough. Security arrives late, loud, shouting commands. The moment breaks. The man bolts, abandoning the cart, disappearing through a staff-only door. The cart rolls to a stop. Inside, beneath the linens, is not a weapon. It's a case, hard, reinforced, purpose-built. The nurse doesn't open it. She backs away and signals containment. Security swarms now, adrenaline overtaking discipline. Radios light up. Orders overlap. The nurse watches the chaos reassert itself. The intruder wanted this. She closes her eyes for half a second, centers herself, then steps back into motion. She can't control everything, but she can still control enough. She reassigns staff away from the abandoned cart, creates a sterile perimeter using medical protocol, not force. She positions herself where she can see the corridor the intruder used. He won't run far. Not yet. This phase is about pressure. The hospital is no longer just a setting. It's the battleground, and under the fluorescent light, the margins for error are gone. The case is still sealed when the evacuation option appears. A senior administrator arrives with a phone pressed to his ear, voice low, urgent. He gestures sharply toward the exits, toward the ambulance bay. Plans shift in real time. Partial evacuation. Selective relocation. Move who you can fast. It sounds decisive. It isn't. The nurse watches the proposal form and break apart at the same time. She sees which patients are being named and which are not. Ventilated, unstable, too difficult to move without time they do not have. She knows what the plan actually is. Leave them, not out of cruelty, out of arithmetic. She steps into the administrator's path, doesn't block him, forces him to stop by existing. "You can't clear the west side like that," she says quietly. "You'll strand critical patients." His jaw tightens. "We don't have the manpower." "You have it," she replies. "You're choosing not to use it. Because it's unsafe." "Yes," she says. "For the people doing the moving." The words land. That's the truth no one wants spoken. A tremor runs through the building. Barely perceptible, but enough to trip a sensor. Somewhere, an alarm starts and is silenced almost immediately. The nurse looks toward the sound. "He's still shaping your choices," she says. Every move away from care makes his work easier. The administrator rubs his face. Exhaustion wins over authority. "Then what do you suggest?" She considers the question carefully. "I stay," she says. He blinks. "Stay where?" "Here," she replies. "With them." "That's not—" "I know," she says, "but it's the only way you don't lose control." The charge nurse overhears. "You can't ask that." "I'm not asking," the nurse says. "I'm informing." She turns away before they can argue further. She moves to the rooms being quietly deprioritized, the ones with no easy transport, no fast solutions. She checks ventilator settings, medication windows, backup power connections. She consolidates care, reducing movement, reducing exposure. She works with the precision of someone who understands what time really costs. A patient's blood pressure drops unexpectedly. She responds instantly, adjusts medication, stabilizes the line, reassures with measured calm. "You're safe," she tells him. "I'm here." She doesn't promise rescue. She promises presence. In the corridor, security radios crackle. Movement detected near the stairwell again. A guard suggests pulling back staff from the west entirely. The nurse shakes her head. That gives him the wing. No one argues now. A young nurse approaches her, eyes wide. "They're saying you don't have to stay." The nurse meets her gaze. Someone does. The young nurse swallows. "What if he comes back?" "Then he comes back," the nurse says. And we adjust. She assigns the young nurse to help. Simple tasks, clear boundaries. She keeps her close, not for protection, but for continuity. The abandoned case is moved to a secure holding area. Bomb squad protocols are mentioned. Outside agencies are being notified now. Slowly, carefully. The nurse hears fragments of those conversations and files them away. This is no longer an internal problem, but the cost is already being paid. Her phone vibrates in her pocket for the first time all night. She doesn't check it immediately. She finishes adjusting a monitor first. Then she steps into a quiet alcove and looks. No message, just a missed call. She exhales once. She knows better than to step away now. Another patient deteriorates, arrhythmia. She intervenes with swift, controlled action. No panic, no wasted movement. She guides the team through it without raising her voice. When it's over, the room feels heavier. The charge nurse finds her again. "You don't have to do this alone." The nurse looks around, at the patients, the staff, the narrowed corridors. "I'm not alone," she says. "I'm just the one not leaving." Outside, the sound of rotors passes faintly overhead. Distant, not yet relevant. The nurse doesn't look up. She knows escalation when she hears it. Staying is no longer a choice. It's a line she has drawn. And whatever comes next will cross it. The intruder makes his next move without noise. No alarms, no forced doors, no sudden outages, just absence. A hallway camera that should show motion shows nothing at all. Not darkness, nothing. A frozen image held just long enough to look live. The nurse sees it immediately. She doesn't alert the room, she doesn't point. She simply shifts where she stands, adjusting her angle until the reflection in the glass gives her a second view of the corridor beyond the feed. There is movement there. Slow, deliberate. She signals the charge nurse with a single gesture, 2 fingers down, palm inward, not a hospital signal. Something older. The charge nurse doesn't recognize it, but she understands the meaning anyway. Hold. Security radios crackle nearby. Someone suggests a sweep. The nurse intervenes before the idea spreads. "Don't chase him," she says quietly. A guard bristles. "He's inside a medical facility." "Yes," she replies, "which means you already know where he has to go." They look at her, confused. She continues calm. "He needs access, power, visibility, movement. You deny those, he has to surface." The guard hesitates. And how do we deny that without force? The nurse glances down the corridor. By controlling time. She moves first, not toward the intruder, but away from him. She dims a bank of lights, leaving only emergency illumination, not darkness. Contrast. She closes 2 fire doors halfway, enough to alter acoustics. Sound now carries unevenly, footsteps distorted. She reroutes staff traffic through alternate paths, reducing noise in the compromised zone. The hospital grows quieter, not because it is empty, but because it is disciplined. The intruder loses his map. A patient calls out in pain. The nurse responds immediately, loudly enough to be heard. She wants the sound to exist. She wants it to anchor the space. She stabilizes the patient and leaves the door open. A calculated vulnerability. The intruder takes it. He appears at the threshold. Scrubs again, face partially obscured, posture controlled. He doesn't rush. He watches her hands, not her eyes. She notices. She keeps her hands visible. "Wrong room," she says. He doesn't answer. Security shifts nearby, tense. One guard starts to move. The nurse lifts her hand. "Stop." She addresses the intruder calmly. "You're out of time." His eyes flick toward the corridor. He knows it's true. The hospital is no longer reacting to him. It's waiting. "You don't belong here," he says. "Neither do you," she replies. The exchange is not confrontation, it's assessment. He takes a step back. She doesn't advance. She tilts her head slightly, just enough to indicate the cameras, the narrowed exits, the staff positioned not as guards, but as obstacles. "You won't get what you came for," she says. "And you won't leave clean." He studies her now, really studies her. "You're not hospital," he says. She doesn't correct him. Sirens sound faintly outside, controlled, distant, external units staging, not rushing in. Not yet. The intruder exhales once through his nose. "You're making this worse for yourself." The nurse nods. "I know." He retreats, not running, not surrendering. He disappears back into the corridor, swallowed by the altered space. Security surges forward instinctively. "No," the nurse says, firmer now. "Let him move." They hesitate, then comply. Minutes stretch. The hospital holds its breath. Then a voice comes through a secure channel, measured, professional. "We have visual on a subject exiting the west stairwell." The nurse closes her eyes for half a second. Containment worked. The intruder is intercepted outside the patient care zones. No struggle audible, no shots fired. Just orders given, followed. Inside, nothing breaks. The administrator approaches her slowly, voice low. "They said he was coordinating with someone else." The nurse nods. He was. And he's no longer the problem. The administrator studies her. "How did you know?" She looks past him toward the patient still breathing, still stable. "Because he stopped trying to win," she says. "He started trying to leave." Outside, rotors grow louder now, closer, purposeful. A helicopter settles onto the hospital grounds with practiced restraint, not dramatic. Precise. No one cheers. The nurse doesn't move. A man in dark civilian clothing enters through a secured access point, flanked by hospital security. His posture is military even without uniform. He scans the room, then his eyes land on her. Recognition flickers. But he doesn't acknowledge it yet. Not here. Not in front of them. The hospital begins to exhale. The crisis is no longer inside, but the weight of what was required to keep it that way settles heavily on the nurse's shoulders. She remains where she is. Control maintained. Violence avoided. Cost paid. The hospital does not celebrate containment. There is no applause when the final security confirmation comes through. No visible relief when the external team reports the subject in custody, secondary search negative, immediate threat neutralized. There is only procedure. Hallways reopen in stages. Lights return to full intensity. Radios move from vibrate back to open channels. Staff resume motion, slower now, as if testing the ground after an earthquake. The nurse remains where she is. She cleans her hands, rechecks a monitor, adjusts a blanket that doesn't need adjusting. The man in civilian clothing approaches again, this time alone. He stops a respectful distance away, eyes scanning the space first, not for danger, but for witnesses. "Ma'am," he says evenly, not using her name. She looks at him. "Patients are stable." "I know," he replies. "That's why I'm here." They stand like that for a moment, two people speaking around something neither intends to say aloud. The administrator joins them, posture formal now, trying to reclaim authority. "We appreciate the rapid response," he says to the man. "We've never had an incident of this scale." The man nods politely. "You handled it." His eyes flick briefly toward the nurse. The administrator misses it. Security supervisors arrive, eager, talking too much. Reports are exchanged. Timelines clarified. The narrative begins to form, not false but incomplete. The nurse listens without interrupting. When a detail is wrong, she corrects it once, calmly, precisely, then lets the rest stand. A guard approaches her, uncertain. They're asking who coordinated the internal containment. The nurse looks at the charge nurse. The charge nurse hesitates, then answers before the nurse can speak. It was a team effort. The nurse nods slightly. Agreement. The man in civilian clothing watches this exchange closely. Later, quietly, he pulls the administrator aside. Their conversation is brief. Unheard, the administrator's posture changes. His shoulders stiffen. He glances toward the nurse with a different expression now. Not suspicion, calculation. The helicopter remains outside, rotors idle, presence deliberate. It is not here for spectacle. It is here because timing matters. The nurse feels the weight of it pressing at the edges of the room. The man returns to her side. "We need a word," he says, privately. She considers the patients, the staff, the slow normalization of space. 5 minutes, she says. They step into a side corridor, out of sight but not out of earshot. He doesn't salute. He doesn't lower his voice dramatically. "You weren't supposed to be here tonight," he says. She meets his eyes. Neither was he. A corner of his mouth tightens, not quite a smile. "You exceeded scope." She shrugs slightly. "I stayed in my lane." He studies her. "You controlled a dynamic threat inside a civilian facility without discharging force." "Yes," she says, "that's not nursing." "No," she agrees. He exhales slowly. "Command wants a debrief." She shakes her head once. "Not here." "Not now," he amends. She considers. "I'll submit a statement through proper channels." He nods. They won't like that. They rarely do. Another pause. Respect now. Unmistakable. "I'll say this," he adds. "You kept them from seeing what this could have become." She looks back toward the ward. That was the point. They return to the open space. The administrator approaches again, voice softer than before. "I've been told to thank you for your initiative." She nods. "Of course, HR will want a report," he continues. "And There may be questions about your background. There always are, she replies. He hesitates. Is there anything you need? She looks around once more, patients resting, staff regrouping, the building settling. Yes, she says. I need to finish my shift. He blinks. You don't have to. I do, she says. He nods uncertain and steps away. The man in civilian clothing watches her return to work without ceremony. He checks his watch, then his phone. A message arrives. He types a short response. She's still in control. Outside, the helicopter lifts, slowly, quietly, pulling attention upward for just a moment before fading into the distance. Inside, the nurse replaces a medication tray and updates a chart. No announcement is made, no explanation is offered. The story that will be told later will be clean, safe, incomplete. And that is exactly how she wants it. The helicopter returns after dawn. Not loudly, not urgently, it settles onto the far edge of the hospital grounds where staff parking meets the service road, blades slowing with the confidence of a machine that knows it will not be questioned. No sirens accompany it, no cameras, just a quiet perimeter drawn by people who understand discretion. Inside, the hospital is almost normal again. Morning shift filters in with fresh faces and partial information. Rumors circulate, softened by daylight. An incident, a lockdown, something serious handled. The nurse finishes a chart and signs it cleanly. Her hands are steady now, but fatigue sits deep in her shoulders, earned, not dramatic. A security supervisor approaches, clearing his throat. They're asking for you. She doesn't ask who they are. She washes her hands again, habit more than necessity, then follows him down a service corridor rarely used by clinical staff. The walls are bare, the lights hum. At the end of the hall, a set of doors stands open to the outside. The helicopter waits. 2 men stand near it. One is the same man from earlier, civilian clothes, military posture. The other wears a flight suit, helmet tucked under his arm. He doesn't look at the building. He looks at her. She stops a few feet away. For a moment, no one speaks. Then the man in the flight suit breaks the silence. "Morning, Chief," he says. The word lands softly, precisely, not loud enough for anyone else to hear. The nurse doesn't react. "SEAL Combat Pro," he adds, quieter still. Not a title meant for introduction. A designation meant for certainty. The man in civilian clothes watches her closely, not to see if she flinches, but to confirm that she won't. She doesn't. "There's no need for that," she says evenly. The pilot inclines his head. Just protocol. She looks past them at the helicopter, then back to the hospital behind her. "I'm still on shift." The man in civilian clothes steps in. "We're not extracting you." She studies him. "Good. This is consultation," he continues. "External coordination. Nothing on record here." She nods once. That's how it stays. The pilot glances at the building. "They did well. They did enough," she replies. A pause. "Command wants to know why you stayed," the man in civilian clothes says. She considers the question, not because it's difficult, but because the answer deserves care. Because leaving would have taught the wrong lesson, she says, to the wrong people. He accepts that. "Your cover held," he says, barely. She allows herself a breath. It usually does. The pilot steps closer, lowering his voice further. "You need anything?" She shakes her head. "Just time. You'll get some," he says. They exchange a look that contains years without naming them. Then he steps back. The man in civilian clothes extends a hand, not for a shake, but to pass something small. A folded card, no insignia visible. "Secure line," he says, "if this ever happens again." She takes it, slips it into her pocket without looking. "I hope it doesn't," she says. "So do we," he replies. The pilot turns toward the helicopter. "We're wheels up in 2. She doesn't follow. She steps back instead. "Thank you," the man in civilian clothes says, not ceremoniously. "Personally." She nods, for keeping it quiet. "That too." The rotors begin to turn. Staff nearby glance over, curious but uninformed. To them, it's just another agency movement. Another day with paperwork. The helicopter lifts smoothly, banking away from the hospital, its shadow passing briefly over the building before disappearing. No announcement follows. The nurse stands for a moment longer, then turns and walks back inside. She returns to the floor, finishes her shift handoff with the same calm clarity she started with, no mention of the night beyond clinical facts. When she removes her badge, her name is smudged where someone's thumb rubbed against it in passing. She leaves the hospital the way she entered it, quietly. And behind her, the building continues, unaware of how close it came to learning who she really was. By mid-morning, the hospital has decided what it will remember. Not consciously, not officially. Memory here is shaped by necessity, by what allows work to continue without questions that slow everything down. The incident becomes the lockdown. The intruder becomes a security breach. The containment becomes good coordination under pressure. Names are not attached. The nurse notices this as she walks the corridor one last time before leaving. The building has resumed its usual tempo. Stretchers roll. Voices rise and fall. The night's tension lingers only as a faint residue in people's movements. Slower turns, longer looks at doors. She passes the west wing. The scuff on the door seam has been cleaned, the missing screw replaced. The cable trap is gone, recorded as debris and removed. The hospital is already erasing evidence of its own vulnerability. At the nurse's station, the charge nurse finishes a report and looks up when she sees her. "You heading out?" she asks. "Yes," the nurse replies. The charge nurse hesitates. "Listen. About last night," the nurse waits. "I didn't back you at first," the charge nurse continues. "I should have." The nurse considers her words carefully. "You made decisions with the information you had." "That's not an excuse," the charge nurse says. "No," the nurse agrees, "but it's reality." The charge nurse exhales, relieved by the absence of judgment. "Still, thank you," the nurse nods once. "You kept people alive." "That seems to matter more." A junior resident approaches, awkward. "I reviewed the footage," he says. "The way you repositioned the trauma intake, if we hadn't." "You don't need to finish that sentence," the nurse says gently. He stops, swallows. "Right." A security guard offers her a quiet nod as she passes. Not formal, not friendly, acknowledgement without curiosity. That, she understands. Near the elevators, the administrator stands with a clipboard, fielding questions from someone in a suit. He notices her only as she is about to step inside. He pauses. "Nurse." She turns. "We're updating our emergency protocols," he says. "Your input would be valuable." She meets his eyes, then asks for it properly. A flicker of discomfort crosses his face, then respect. "We will," he says. She steps into the elevator before he can say more. As the doors close, she catches her reflection in the polished metal. She looks like what she is supposed to look like. Tired, ordinary. Done with a long shift. The elevator descends. Outside, daylight has fully claimed the morning. The hospital stands solid and unchanged, giving no sign of how close it came to becoming something else. She walks to her car. On her phone, a single message waits. No sender ID, no context, good containment, no follow-up required. She deletes it. The hospital will not put her name in a report. It will not remember the hand signals. It will not remember how close it came to panic. What it will remember is subtler, that sometimes when things go wrong, one voice cuts through without raising volume, that sometimes the safest decisions come from the least visible place, that sometimes authority does not announce itself, As she drives away, the building recedes in her mirror. Another shift will begin tonight. New staff, new patients, familiar routines, and somewhere in the hospital's unspoken memory, there will be a quiet adjustment. Doors checked twice, corridors watched more carefully, silence treated with a little more respect. They will not know why, and she will not be there to explain. She does not watch the hospital disappear. At the last intersection before the highway, she stops at a red light and looks straight ahead. The building remains in her peripheral vision only, present but no longer hers to manage. Her shift is over. The city moves the way it always does in the morning. Delivery trucks idle. Commuters check their phones. Somewhere, a siren passes without urgency. Life resumes without asking permission. She parks outside her apartment complex and sits for a moment longer, hands resting on the wheel. The fatigue reaches her now, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just honest, the kind that settles in the joints, earned by attention rather than effort. She exhales once. Inside, she changes out of her scrubs and folds them carefully. Habit, respect for the role even now. Her badge goes into a drawer, turned face down. No calls come, no messages follow. That is intentional. Later that afternoon, inside the hospital, a brief meeting takes place. Policies are revised. Language is softened. Responsibility is distributed, so no single name carries too much weight. Someone suggests a commendation. Someone else points out the paperwork required. The idea fades. In the West Wing, a nurse pauses at a doorway that once locked when it shouldn't have. She checks the handle twice before moving on, not knowing why she feels the need. A security guard reroutes a patrol slightly, adjusting a path he's walked for years. No one connects these changes to a person. That night, the hospital runs smoothly. No intrusions, no alarms, no tests, and that is the final proof of success. In her apartment, she sleeps without dreams. When she wakes, the phone remains silent. No recall, no debrief, no explanation requested. Her cover remains intact because nothing demands it be broken. Days later, she will return for another shift. Same badge, same quiet arrival. Another unit, another set of assumptions. Someone will glance at her resume and shrug. Another quiet nurse. That is how it must stay. Authority, when used correctly, leaves no footprint. Protection, when done right, feels like nothing at all. The helicopter will not return. Her name will not circulate. The story will never be told accurately, and somewhere inside the hospital's walls, behind locked doors that now lock properly, there will be a faint absence, the absence of what could have happened. She accepts that, because the work was never about being seen. It was about making sure no one else ever had to be.